Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about Alpine JS, and I worked on Alpine JS before. I'm not an expert at it, so hopefully in this video I'm going to be learning with you. This is going to be an actual playlist where we're going to go from the basics to some of the advanced topics of Alpine JS, and it's actually a very popular lightweight JavaScript framework that's very easy to work with. Even if you don't have a lot of familiarity with JavaScript, you can still use Alpine for some of the basic stuff, like for example opening drop-downs, using or opening the slider bar on the menu, and doing some really basic JavaScript stuff without necessarily knowing a lot about JavaScript. So for those who are starting out, who don't have a lot of experience with jQuery or JavaScript, I would propose actually getting started with Alpine, and I'm going to be teaching you how to do that. So do subscribe to hit the bell icon, and let's get into it. So the first thing, as you can see in front of you, I have a file that's empty. I just have, for example, some of the Tailwind included, some of the styles.css included, though obviously even the styles.css isn't required, so I'm just going to remove it, or I'm going to comment it. Maybe we require it in the future. So I'm just going to comment it, and then we basically have a body tag. So I'm just going to go ahead to, let's say, Alpine JS. I'm just going to search Alpine JS on Google. Here we have Alpine, and then I'm going to go to the docs basically. Anytime you're starting off with something, obviously it's understood that you should go to the docs, you should read about it. But let's just go ahead and actually include the script file that's here. So I'm going to include the script file, and now that that's included, I'm basically just going to copy this h1 as an example that they've given, and I'm going to go ahead and actually give this a larger text. So before we even actually go and look at the output, let's just see what's going on here. So x minus data is, you can consider it as an initializer, and for those who perhaps aren't aware of JavaScript that much, you can consider us on the HTML side actually saying, hey Alpine, look at me. I'm actually entering something within me and you should do something about it. So what I've basically done is I've called out Alpine and I've said, hey, I want to create a message variable, or I want to create a message container. Even if you aren't familiar with variables, like hopefully you are, so I'm just going to use the term variable. You can consider a variable to be a container of sorts as well. So it's basically going to say the message variable is going to contain a value, and it's going to contain the I love Alpine value. Obviously you can write your name here or do whatever, and then basically Alpine is going to say, okay, I'm going to store that in the message variable, and now that it's stored, I can actually use it in my HTML to do something about it. So in the first instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the text for this particular h1 element is actually going to be the message that I entered in my x minus data property. So now that I've done that, if I actually go to my source, go to the preview, as you can see, we have the I love Alpine that's printed out as a text for the h1. And I can obviously I love Alpine and change this message here, and my name is Asad. So if I go ahead and do that, as you can see, that's updated, and that works fine and dandy. Let's go to a slightly more complicated example, which isn't necessarily that complicated, but I just want to highlight a few particular things here. So here we have the x minus data properties. Previously we said like the message is going to be this particular message. Now we're basically saying we're going to initialize, or we're going to have a variable named count. It's going to have a count of 0. So by default, the count is 0. And I'm basically saying when I click this button, so obviously when I say x minus on click, it's basically saying anytime a person clicks this particular button, you should increase the count. And count plus plus is basically a way of saying you need to increase the count that was previously defined by 1. So if it was 0 before, you need to make it 1. If it was 1 before, you need to make it 2, so on and so forth. So let me just go ahead and give some styling to this button. You don't have to give the styling. I'm just giving it so that you can actually see the button. So btn minus blue minus 600 and px minus 2 and py minus 5 or something. That I think that should be fine. So for some reason, sorry, not btn minus blue, that's bg minus blue. So now that we have this button, I can actually go ahead and click it. And as you can see previously, I'm just going to refresh it. Previously, the count was 0. And then if I'm actually increasing it, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. So most of it is working. And similarly, I have the x minus text count here. So previously, maybe some of you might be wondering, why would I go ahead and type the x minus data here and then type the x minus text here and type the message here? Why shouldn't I just go ahead and actually type this whole message here? Well, that should hopefully be clear by now that this particular text that I'm actually using via x minus text is dynamic. So as I actually change the value of it on the global level, or at least obviously on the file level and on the tag level, it's also going to increase here as well. So I couldn't have done just 0 here and expected the count to increase magically, right? So I can't do that. Like obviously I have a fixed value here. However, if I actually define the text value via a variable, anytime a person increases that, obviously it's increased, it actually updates on the HTML and as well as a text. So that's really important. I think those are the things that I want you to get started with. Go ahead and actually start this or play around with this example, actually change the x minus data value to whatever it is that you want. Experiment with x minus text and experiment with x minus data along with, let's say, x minus on click. One thing, however, that I want to point out, which you may get stuck in if you're not following the examples that are given in Alpine, is imagine I actually included this button below. And I said, okay, you want to initialize the x minus data count to 0 and then you want to increment it. So basically I have the button below, no major changes. But now if I actually click on the increment, it's not working. But why is that? So the reason for that is when the count is initialized, when the x minus data does something, it basically says count minus 0, right? I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. But basically what it does is it adds this particular thing, as you can consider it, like I'm just visually trying to describe it to you. It basically limits the scope of this count variable to the thing in itself on which it is defined and to its children's. So you can't really access this count variable, let's say here or here or here outside of it or anything along those lines. You can only access it here on the top level and on its children. So which is why obviously it's not working here. Similarly, if I actually included it here, you can see that it would not work here as well. So I'm going to increment the count, that's not working as well. So in order for you, let's say if you want to place all of these things separately, a good way of doing that would actually be to include the x minus data property at the top level, maybe on the body tag if you want, just in case if you want it. If you don't want it, if you just want to place it on a particular element, that's perfectly fine as well. So now that I've placed it above, as you can see, the button isn't really included within the span. It's not placed beside it, but still it would work because now this count variable is accessible because it lives as a child of the larger tag on which it is defined. So now it works. Similarly, I can go ahead and I can actually copy this message as well. And I can say I want to define that at the top level as well. So instead of actually having multiple x minus data properties on different things, I can actually define the x minus data property on, let's say, the body tag or somewhere far above, which is actually pushing it to a lot of different children, or its siblings. So now I can actually just go ahead and remove the x minus data property from here. And if we actually go ahead and have a look at it, you can see the HTML, and I'm just going to go ahead and actually remove it just so you can see that it's updating. Now you can see that this x minus data property that's defined on the body tag is actually pushing its values to this h1 as a text, and this button is also working. I can increase it, and this count is also working. So those are a few things that you need to wrap your head around. Go ahead and experiment with it. Let me know if you have any questions, and let's dive a bit deeper in the next video and talk about some of the advanced ways in which you can use Alpine. Particularly, maybe I'm gonna see whatever I'm gonna cover in the next video, but we're gonna talk about how you can actually make UI elements interactable. You can open drop downs, so on and so forth, and you can hide or unhide things based on a click. So we're gonna cover that in the next video, hopefully, or maybe in the next. So do subscribe to hit the bell icon, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.